Hello and welcome back to Colonial Outcasts. I'm Greg Stoker and I'm here with co-host Mark Wayne and Jenan Matari. She's a award-winning Palestinian writer, producer, and content creator. I've actually been watching her videos. We've been in touch for a while now, at least since this thing kicked off. And I think, I don't know, I've really been informed and connected with your message because you have made things very clear when it comes to solidarity, and especially being a Palestinian American, that's kind of been a bridging voice between a lot of gaps in the conversation that people have, or barriers to entry into it. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I love all of your content also, and the way that you think that I've bridged the gap with the Palestinian American voice, like you have done that for people to understand the military aspect of things and like the interconnectedness of, American militarism and what's happening right now through Israel and Palestine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's all about, cross activist solidarity. So I started off with the veteran stuff, and that easily ported over to what was happening, in Israel. I was interested in your story in your recent video about your Jewish friends' behavior around your advocacy for Palestine and how they had never considered Israel to be a bad actor. And how you'll always have to remind people that the existence of Israel has always been dangerous and violent. It's not just about the current government or the regime. Israelis only started protesting when their own rights were curtailed. That does seem accurate. And the idea that Israel was once good, but has been tarnished by a corrupt government and administration, the entire project must be dismantled if peace and stability are to return to Palestine and the region at large. Because if we look at the news right now, it seems like everybody is positioning Bibi and a couple of his most rabid ministers to take the fall for it. And then after they do and they fall on their proverbial swords, or they're made to fall on their proverbial swords, it'll just go back to business as usual. Like, problem solved, the machine of imperialism rolls on.
I love that. Obviously, I'm not going to object to anyone protesting, but I think it's important that we recognize that the protests are not for Palestine, that this is like a societal issue, not a governmental issue. And so getting people to kind of unlearn what they've been taught about Israel and its founding and its current existence, and like this supposed need for it to exist for other people's safety. I've gotten like more direct, right? Like we're like, 137 days into watching this live stream, and every day I like lose a little bit more of a filter that I didn't realize was there. So it's just getting people to understand that like this has always been a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing now. It's going to continue to be a terrible thing for as long as it exists. So it can no longer exist.
Right. And so I think a lot of people would say like, but there are protests. There are protests for a ceasefire. And I guess that's true. I found a video that we're going to play briefly, and we'd like your response on that. So I'm just going to pull it up real quick. It's protests in Tel Aviv for a ceasefire. This was published by Middle East Eye about a month ago.
Well, this protest is about Arab people and Jewish people standing together. And we live here together in this country, and I believe that we have to live here together. And I do believe that we can live peacefully together. And I am for peace and for the two-state solution, which our Prime Minister doesn't want even to talk about.
Israelis, Palestinians, Muslims, Jews, and Christians. This is everybody's home. The only solution is to recognize that both people are entitled to a life of freedom and sovereignty and dignity, no matter their religion and background. These are basic human rights that have been withdrawn from millions of people for 56 years. So there is, of course, the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th will never be pardoned and excused. They never can, period. No forgiveness. But if you don't see the historical context, then you're condemned to repeat the same tragedy over and over again.
Okay.
Okay.
Was that Robert Downey Jr., that last one?
I think it was the past middle-aged poor man's Robert Downey Jr.
The Shaggy version.
So,
yeah, he's gone downhill. He's gone downhill.
Yeah. So, initial reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the second guy said most of the right things. Of course, they always have to mention Hamas. But like was that a standing together protest? Is that do you know if that was the group? Yeah. So there's a lot of,
they were involved.
Yeah, they're officially on the BDS list because of like normalization tactics. And you could see it in the language that the first woman had used. Like she talked about how this was for Arab people and Jewish people, like the erasure of the Palestinian identity to call us Arabs. That's where the term like Arab Israeli came, right? Like this erasure of the term Palestine and Palestinian. So whenever somebody's using that terminology, like I immediately start to zone out because I know that they're full of shit. And this idea of like the problem with the second guy was he talked about how this was a land for everyone, right? Like he named Palestinians, said Muslims, Jews, Christians, but that can't exist in a fascist ethno-state. Like there will never be this peace that everybody is obsessed with when you are living under rule of an ethno-state. It's called an ethno-state for a reason, right? There's a superiority of someone, and that like it's counterintuitive to what he was claiming he wanted for everyone, or how he envisioned like this peaceful living, because it's just not possible. And Palestine was not a religious country. Like it wasn't ruled by a religion. It's always been secular. It's meant to be secular. And so this concept of, yeah, okay, we can all live together in this one country for all these religions, but it should be Israel, and it should be like it should still be considered like a Jewish homeland. It's just it butts heads, right? It doesn't make sense. And then the idea of us wanting to live next to, like in a two-state solution next to our genociders, it just doesn't. It's not what Palestinians want, and it's clear. Like they didn't have a single Palestinian voice at that protest talking about it, so that makes it very clear. That it's not what it's a ceasefire protest, okay, but it's not for a free Palestine. It's so that they can stop bombing the Israeli hostages that are inside of Gaza, and then we can get back to, our normal routine of Palestinians living under occupation and apartheid.
You know what stands out to me about this type of I would call it toothless type of protest? Mm-hmm. Is the lack of specificity, mm-hmm. right? Like, for example, to call for peace and use these very general terms, but not list any specific demands that are very obvious that need to be listed, mm-hmm. such as the children who are in detention, administrative detention, mm-hmm. right? And countless other ones too. Yeah. Like, I'm not gonna speak on those because you as a Palestinian should be the one listing these things. Mm-hmm. But it's the lack of specificity that gets me. Mm-hmm. It's like, we need peace. What does that fucking mean?
Yeah.
What does that word mean to you? Does that mean like, everything's quiet, everything's calm?
Yeah.
We know, but or there's just no fighting.
Yeah.
But there's no fighting, but we still keep those kids in detention, in administrative detention.
Yeah.
So that to me is what raises red flags whenever when you hear protesters like this that are toothless. You know, they're inconsequential, because unless you're going to list very specific things that are going on, instead of giving this general atmosphere like we just want peace and hold hands, and and like Greg said, blaming Bibi, keeping this honed in on just a few individuals. Oh, it's just these guys, they're just crazy, and we just need to get rid of those guys, and the problem's solved. It's bullshit, and that's what really shows me that it's just it's impotent. These protests are impotent. So I don't know if you want to go into those specifics that you've noticed that they don't mention.
Yeah, I mean, even like, you know, you just said they love to tie it to Bibi. That was part of the video that Greg was asking me about when it came to how that one friend was like behaving around me and my advocacy for Palestine, and it becoming a bad actor. Like, we have written record of every single governmental figure since the founding of the State of Israel and how they've thought of Palestinians and what they've intended to do to Palestinians. And this was another video that I did where, like, it was the fourth prime minister of Israel. Her name was Golda Meir. And she is, like, one of her most famous quotes is that there will be peace in our land when Arabs love their children more than they hate us. Sorry, it takes me a minute to piece that together properly because it's so utterly absurd. So, like, they have always painted us as these barbaric, violent savages, and they have always intended on erasing us and ethnically.
She said the opposite. They hate us more than they love their children, I think it was.
Yeah, but she said,
right?
like, peace will come when the Arabs stop.
Oh, yeah. Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So,
sorry, my bad.
That's why, like, it always throws me off a little bit also. But so, like, it's been very publicly known that every governmental figure of Israel has behaved in the way that Bibi behaves and the way that Bibi thinks. And for like the cognitive dissonance between like them trying to attach it just to Bibi is, it's like, it's whack. I don't, like, everybody wants to talk about context, right? Like, context.
Bibi is just a symptom of the problem.
Yeah.
He's just a symptom of a greater disease.
Yeah. Like, he needs to go, and then everything else needs to follow, you know?
Greg is frozen.
Oh.
He's look at that.
It's very pensive. Say that, Greg, you froze.
Oh, wait.
There you are. You're back.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So what's striking to me is how it's like they're building this multi-generational myopic plan that's been in effect for over a century. And so, yeah, it's the entire ideology that continues to seemingly get more and more radical, because if you look at the polling and the sociological data within Israel, like, the most conservative far right generations are the youngest generations too. So it's always like honing to this point, you know, that's led to this manifestation in Gaza of late stage colonial violence. You know, that generally happens before a project is slowly dismantled over time. But I did want to go back to the calling for peace. You know, this is something we see within America as well, saying like, oh, we need peace. We need a two-state solution, which, as you know, you and Mark touched upon, is basically just a maintaining of a status quo. And they want their lives. It's essentially like, we want our lives to go back to how it was before October 7th. We want peace, but we also don't want to give up anything. We don't want to surrender any of our privilege. You know, we can talk all day about a two-state solution, but the big qualifier is like, you know, there's no talk about giving up illegal settlements in the West Bank, which ghettoize that entire population. You know, the main condition is right now, as it stands, is as the water cooler talks are happening in Cairo and Doha, alternatively, and in Paris, it needs to be a demilitarized Palestinian state, which we know is completely unworkable in the Middle East. You know, it might be all right in Iceland, which is like an island nation, and it's protected by allies and NATO. But what does a demilitarized Palestinian state mean in the Middle East? So
it means the erasure of Palestine.
Yeah.
I mean, it means death for all Palestinians. Like this obsession with peace is such a white world thing. And we've distracted people from what justice actually looks like by getting them to think that peace and justice are interchangeable. But at the end of the day, like peace without justice is oppression for someone always. There's no escaping that. So, yeah. I also zone out whenever I hear people talking about peace.
I think that the moral equivalency to what we're seeing with these beta protests, like that's the best word I can call it, is the fact that it would be if during the time of the civil rights era, imagine instead of us protesting the treatment of Black people and treating them as equal human beings and citizens, imagine if we all just protested and says, you know what, we need to give them their dignity and allow them to live in their own segregated communities away from us in peace. Right. Imagine if we said that. Imagine if all the protesters got out signs and said, we demand a separate section of the country just for Black people to stay away from us and live in peace. It's the same damn thing. It's just that we're not thinking that way because it's over there.
Yeah.
Palestinians, we don't realize that subconsciously, us Americans, we are thinking in very racist terms in this conflict because we're seeing the Palestinians and the Jews as separate people that need to stay apart from each other because they can't get along, because one is just it's like they're an endangered species of animal that have to be separated from the other species and they can't get along. And we do that as Americans without realizing that that is extremely fucking racist. Like it's the equivalency of telling Black people in the United States that they need to live in their own segregated part of town, which is completely absurd. So,
yeah, that's a great way to break that down. Yeah,
yeah, and another obsession with talking about peace is people mention that, oh, well, why don't they try peaceful resistance, peaceful protests, and of course they're so separated from any sort of struggle.
Context nobody wants to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're so separated from what like actual repression or oppression or persecution looks like that they cannot realize that everybody tries peaceful resistance first, because on a basic human level, no one wants to spend their life in prison and nobody wants to die. So like when an actual violent uprising happens, it's because every other avenue of resistance has been tried and failed, over generations, because it takes a lot for someone to just be like, okay, I'm totally fine being violently destroyed and annihilated.
Yeah, you push people to a brink of survival like that, and that's the only thing you're going to get is some type of violence, especially in Gaza. But I think it started in 2018. Palestinians in Gaza were doing something called every Friday they would march. Thousands of people would march, and it was called the March of the Great Return, I think, or like there's a title that I'm messing up, but that was like a peaceful protest, and people were dying at these protests. Israeli snipers were shooting at medics who were helping people who were, being shot with tear gas and rubber bullets and dying in the field. Like, in occupied Palestine, like it's illegal to, artists started making like protest art because it was illegal to like raise the Palestinian flag. And then they came in and they raided all of these art galleries that had like the colors of the Palestinian flag. And that's how the watermelon became so popular. Like peaceful protest has been a thing for us for the last 75 plus years. And like, it doesn't work. It doesn't, it's the same thing. Like, in the US back in October, I had shared the story of Nat Turner and how the end of slavery didn't come because white people just decided that they had a change of heart and they didn't want to enslave Black people anymore. Like it came because Black people fought for themselves and they got violent and they killed their slave masters. And like there hasn't been a single revolution in the existence of humans on this planet that wasn't won because the oppressed people fought with violence. Like that's just, it's been proven that it's the only way to liberation is when you've decided that you're no longer going to live your life with your oppressor's boots on your neck. and your oppressor is never going to just decide to fucking lift up their foot.
Yeah, and I spent the bulk of my college time studying the British Raj in India and the dissolution of the British Raj that led to the partition that was so catastrophic between India and Pakistan. But there was a lot of revisionist Western narrative about what the dismantling of the Raj looked like. And they said it was all Gandhi and his peaceful resistance and him fasting publicly. It's like, dude, if there was one thing the British Empire was good at, it was enduring scandal and then just moving on.
Yeah.
You know?
They do it today.
Yeah. So it had nothing to do with, like, Gandhi was important for giving Indians a sense of identity again. You could argue, but what it really came down to was mutinies aboard of Indian sailors aboard British ships, armed revolts within the village and the rural countrysides, and the British realized that after their power had been so diminished after World War II. They were thinking, okay, if there is an open rebellion in India and it's visible, which it will be because we can't contain it anymore, all the other colonies could revolt. So if we want to save the dying empire, we need to just get out of India. And I'm being very reductive, but that was the end of the colonial project. It's because their power was waning, which is kind of a corollary now. They couldn't sustain it like they could before the war. And there was just armed rebellion, visible armed resistance.
And honestly, that's not far off with what triggered the British to leave Palestine after the British Mandate. Like, there was a huge Zionist uprising, and British soldiers were being killed, and like
terrorist attacks.
Yes,
the first terrorist attacks committed on that land. The OG terrorist was the
Irgun, the Stern, and
Irgun.
Yeah. So there were these Zionist gangs that were killing British soldiers. So it's not like the British were like, okay, our work here is done. No, same thing.
They're like, fuck this. We're not going to go through this shit.
They're like, all right, let's retreat. We'll pull our people out. So it's like, it's a nice little cycle that people like to pretend isn't happening.
I was just going to say, do you think that these protests are just like these beta protests are just designed to be a pressure release valve, in a sense, just to kind of pacify people enough to give the impression, hey, look, we got a diversity of opinion here. There's some people who don't appreciate what this government's doing. And because the reason what gives me that indicator is the fact that and maybe I'm wrong about this. Are there any talks about ending the genocide and using that word in these protests, or is that word not even mentioned?
No, that word is not mentioned, and it's absolutely a distraction.
Okay, then they're completely bullshit. I don't even have to think about it anymore.
No, you can also figure it out because of how much the media, like mainstream media, hyperfixates on these protests, right? Like, they don't talk about Palestinian protests. They don't talk about the anti-Zionist Jews who are putting their bodies on the line in protests in the US and around the world. Like, they fixate on these like two-staters and this idea that like, oh, Israeli society deserves to continue existing because this is what the real Israel is these people. And it's not. Fucking almost 80% of the country thinks that Palestinians should be wiped off the map. So this isn't like you're absolutely correct in thinking that this is a distraction. Yeah. And it gives people that like reason to kind of justify the continued existence of that state.
Well, just the lack of mentioning all the other things going on. It's like the administrative detention alone in and of itself is a form of genocide, in my opinion, because you're taking children. As a form of intimidation, as a form of terrorizing the population and keeping them psychologically subverted. You know, you're not going to mention, I mean, okay, if you're really about all this, are you going to let them have an airport in West Bank? Are you going to allow free trade where they can just have free commerce going on? Are you going to remove the restrictions of building? Like, start listing some shit that's specific to show us that you mean business. Yeah. But it's usually the lack of it's the things that they don't talk about that tells me where somebody stands. Yeah. It's when they don't talk about something, not the stuff that they're saying, but the stuff that they're not saying. Yeah. You know?
And all of these protests were born from, pre-October 7th when Bibi's government got a little too right wing for, citizens of Israel. and they, like, the media started focusing on their protests against Bibi's seat, and they were trying to, like, they were giving them so much credit for protesting a government in, like, under this guise of, like, oh, democracy might actually be under threat in Israel, when it was never actually there in the first place. And, like, that's where they, like, this is just an extension of those protests. And those protests were specifically protesting for Israeli rights only. They were not in opposition of apartheid. They were not in opposition of the occupation. There was no recognition of Palestinians at all. It was literally just for Israeli rights. And that is that became what we're seeing now with, like, the ceasefire protests. Like, there's never this center, right? We keep saying, like, center Palestinian voices, center Palestinian the struggle. There is no centering of Palestine or Palestinians in these protests ever.
Yeah. You know, something that's always struck me as significant is that whenever you listen to, like, hardcore Zionists talk about, like, the existence of Israel and how they're indigenous to the land, they have a right to exist, it has a right to defend itself, they never once acknowledge, and they say you have to look at the history, but they never acknowledge that the Palestinians lost out on this deal. Like, when the Israeli state was created, there's no mention of, you know, it being a raw deal for anyone else. It's just all hyper fixated on themselves. Yeah. And I think this is just another extension of that. They made a show that was supposed to bridge the Israeli-Palestinian divide and explore it. It's a crime drama called Fauda about the
Fauda.
I
saw your video on that.
I made it through about 5 episodes, and I was like, I literally can't anymore.
Because you know why? Because in that show Fauda, when I was watching your video on that, I saw exactly what you were talking about. In Fauda, they portray it as the Israeli operatives as having these moral dilemmas. It's like, I really care about the lives of these Palestinians, but I have to do my job. Yeah. And it's like, in reality, it's like, there's a kid, boom, no conscience, no regret, nothing, no remorse. There's no moral conflict going on, like, and you saw that in the movie. Now, before Fauda, Greg, there's the movie Munich, which I used to love back when I was pro-Israeli.
How many movies do we have about, like, good conscience Nazis that, like, didn't want to do their job but were just following? Fuck off with that.
Which looked good, and they at the time, like, for example, when I used to be pro-Israel, back in when I was I think I was 19 or 20, I saw the movie Munich, and I was watching it, and I was like, oh, maybe they have a conscience. Oh, I see what's going on. You know, like, you see the main character, he's struggling. He's protesting with the superiors. It's like, why are we killing? Why is it always surrounded about death? Why do we always have to kill the Palestinians? And it's the moral back and forth that you see. And what's funny is my super Zionist friends thought that movie was too far left on the issue. And looking back on it, now at the time, I didn't know any better because I was stuck in that propaganda bubble. But looking back, I'm like, oh my God, that was all part of that whole, mental jujitsu that they've been doing. So
and it's also based on complete lies. Like, circling back to Fauda, within the first episode, we have things that we know they don't do. So one of the Palestinian characters is going to try and find nerve gas. Literally not ever been used by them. Yeah. So like these Mistarvim are trying to foil the nerve gas plot and break open the nerve gas cell, and then they raid a wedding and kill the groom. Because that's something that actually does happen. It like seemed like an accident, and everybody was really sorry about it. But, like, shit happens when you're on the job. So they kill the groom, and then the wife's like, I want to become, she goes to the resistance in West Bank, and she's like, I want to become a shaheed. And then they start talking about explosive belts. And I'm just like, dude, according to the Israeli Ministry of War, Hamas or any Palestinian resistance group hasn't used that since 2008. So, like, it's all predicated on this, like, fantasy that doesn't really exist. That's not, like, supported by fact at all.
And they all have this underlying message that, like, Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims are just violent by nature. Like, there is no, every single one of these shows and these movies that they create, there is no recognition that the reason why violence is used from the Palestinian side is because we're fucking occupied and we're oppressed.
Because they're experiencing violence every day, just in little pockets.
No recognition that we're fighting an empire, and that anything that that doesn't recognize that, you can immediately throw in the trash.
Yeah. So this is a good segue into some of the more white liberalism arguments that we're seeing, and it's coming back to our favorite Stranger Things actor, Noah Tishby.
Okay, hold on before you play it.
Okay, yes.
Come on, I want to do the intro. You stole the intro from me.
Wait,
dude.
Noah
I'm
Tishby
sorry.
was in Stranger Things?
I think so. I'm also I'm a tired idiot,
that.
so you probably should have done the intro.
No, I think
retcon that.
Actually, no. I don't know anything about Noah Tishby either.
Okay. Hold on.
No, I don't know anything about her. I just wanted to say, I just wanted to ask, I wanted to ask you this. Are you ready for some cringe? Some major, I'm sure you've seen this video for it, because we're about to go down into some major cringe.
I actively avoid watching anything that woman puts out on the internet.
but after I watched your videos on IG, I was like, you know what? She is like the arch enemy of a girl like Noah Tishby. I'm like, we have got to show her this video.
Okay,
I got to get your perspective on this. I want to go into this cringe. Let's dive in. Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. Right. We apologize in advance. It's only a minute and a half.
For your facts of the week with Noah and Mime. All right, you ready? Ready. True or false? Jews are a huge percent of the world population. Noah, that's false. Jews are 0.2% of the worworld population. 0.2%, compared with 30%, which are Christian, 25% Muslims, and 15% Hindus. True or false? Jews are waging a unilateral war against the Palestinian people.
False. Not only was Israel attacked on October 7 by an army of 3,000 terrorists, Israel continued to be attacked from the south, the north, and from the sea. So Iran-backed Houthis from Yemen are throwing rockets at Israel from the south, and Iran-backed Hezbollah from Lebanon are launching rockets at Israel from the north. So not only did Israel not launch the war, start the war, and it's not unilateral, Israel's constantly under attack since October 7th. True or false? Israel should agree to a ceasefire immediately.
False. No country in the world would be asked to stop protecting itself under attack from all of its borders. All right, last one, Noah. True or false? The Jews should just go back to their homeland and all of this would be over.
False. As Golda Meir said, our secret weapon is that we have nowhere to go. There are 49 countries in the world with Muslim majority and 22 Arab countries in the region. Israel is the only Jewish state in the world. The Jews are the indigenous people of the land of Israel. The Jews have originated from Judea, and that's never going to change. So not only is it not true, it's also never going to change. And
we're not going anywhere.
We're not going anywhere.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Okay. So, first thoughts on that. Yeah, go for it.
I'm so salty that I had to watch it.
Okay.
I want you to sprinkle this salt all out on this conversation, dude. Sprinkle the salt on, baby.
All right. First of all, when you talk that fast, you're just trying to spew some bullshit that you don't want counteracted. I keep putting out this video in different, I keep saying the same thing, but in different ways to make sure that it really gets my point across. And it's that anti-Semitism is being weaponized as the purpose for Israel's existence. So Jewish trauma and Jewish pain and Jewish suffering throughout centuries is being used as a guise for fascism and settler colonialism to continue in the Middle East and throughout the rest of the world. And so Noah, this is what I was saying before. So Noah Schnaps is the person from Stranger Things. Noah Tishby is a PR, she's the director of Israeli Hezbollah. So this is her job, is to just spread propaganda all over the world. Yep. And this is going to get me doxxed because I've actively tried to fucking avoid this person. But her main job is to hire actors like Mayim Bialik to convince people that Israel needs to exist for the safety of the Jewish people, which is, again, like everything else that we talked about, which is it butts heads with the truth. The idea that Jews are only safe in one place of this world is anti-Semitic in itself. Jews should be able to exist anywhere in this world safely and freely. That is true liberation for a people. And it also doesn't make sense. Like, they continue to talk about how Israel has to protect itself from all these surrounding countries that hate it so much. So why would you, like, how does it make sense in anybody's mind to put every Jewish person on the planet in this one tiny strip of land surrounded by countries that supposedly hate it and want to continue to destroy it? How does that bring peace and security and liberation to the Jewish people? How do you reconcile with that? I get very frustrated when people don't like critically think when it comes to things like this, because it just genuinely doesn't make sense on a surface level. You don't even have to dig too deep to realize that like everything that they're saying doesn't make any sense. Right. Yep. And like they weaponize anti-Semitism because people are afraid to be called anti-Semites. If you know,
sorry.
No, it's okay.
No, it's a straw man's argument.
Yeah.
Because this is not the topic. This topic that this is about Jews is getting on my nerves.
Yeah.
Like, and for me, it's very personal. My wife is Jewish. I'm raising my son to be Jewish. I'm not Jewish, but I dive deep in the Jewish world.
Yeah.
To me, what this does, I look at my son's future, and I see how anti-Semitism is being used as a human shield. Mm-hmm. It's like Zionism uses Jews as human shields. That's what it's all about.
Yeah,
especially the diaspora.
Yeah,
the diaspora, all that.
Yeah,
and so it puts the future of Jews in such jeopardy, and they're not thinking about the long-term cost. This is going to enact on the Jewish community by equivocating Israel's actions with the Jewish community. And they're so underrepresented. The Jewish community is so fucking underrepresented in this whole conflict. They have no voice. They've been stripped of it, and they've grabbed the microphone, taken it away from all the Jews, and just walked off with it. So this is your classic, this Noah Tishby thing is your classic straw man's argument. Yeah. Nobody's talking about the Jews here. We're talking about a genocide. We're talking about oppression of Palestinians. Mm-hmm. So that's the part that gets on my nerves.
Yeah. It's like, it's also another video that I put out in that, like, if you as a Jewish person want to identify with the state of Israel, you have to identify with all of it. Like, my family got here pretty late in the game in terms of like the shit that America's experienced, right? Like, we weren't here during segregation. We weren't here during slavery. We weren't here when they murdered the natives. But like, as a born American who holds an American passport, I have to identify with everything that this country has done to everyone. Mm-hmm. Like, that is my history. I have to claim that if I want, not that I want to continue being American, but like, if you want to continue identifying as a Jewish person with this idea of a Jewish state, which is Israel, you have to claim all of it. We can't keep allowing people to disassociate from the violence that Israel is enacting on Palestinians and around the world on behalf of Jewish security and safety, and allow people to continue on with that cognitive dissonance that they think that they can detach themselves from the bad things that this country is doing. Like, you have to claim all of it. And if you don't want to claim all of it, then maybe it doesn't represent you as a Jewish person, which is the thought process that you need to eventually get to,
I like the salt you're bringing out, but I want to see more salt coming out. So can you roll another tape? Can you roll the next one?
Oh my God. This is like,
wait.
All right, go ahead, Greg.
I don't think we have another tape.
Okay.
But, the second one I sent you.
That's strap me down and put headphones on.
No. I think we've accomplished the I played
fine.
I only got one.
Let's do this again, though. Come on, I want to do this.
No, I mean, I can only take like Noah Tishby once a financial quarter. So I think we're set for the time being. And I guess what's frustrating too is like this ideology that's also been so utilized by Western imperialism as well. It's like, we don't mind an Israel that destabilizes an entire region and that gives us excuses to light fires and then go in terms of interventionism as well. Yeah. So I just wanted. And this has been going on. This whole idea of looking towards the resource laden Middle East has been going on as long, even before the state of Israel existed. So, in this view of Palestine, still existed apart from the Zionist ideology. Like Edward Said talks about it in Orientalism, how this has gone back for hundreds of years, and imperialism is facilitated by Orientalism, which is, viewing non-Western people as sort of barbaric, uneducated, in need of enlightenment, which in that Orientalizing narrative allows for the physical manifestation of imperialism, which is colonialism. And so we've been totally down with utilizing the Zionist ideology and project. So from 1947, right before the CIA put out this statement called "The Current Situation in Palestine," and the opening paragraph is very telling. It says, 1, the strategic importance of Palestine. Of course, this was before Israel was created as a state. Palestine is a small, weak country whose war potential is almost non-existent, but whose geographic position gives it a strategic significance out of all proportion to its size and wealth. This significance stems not only from its location at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, its proximity to the Suez Canal, and the fact it is an outlet for the oil of the Middle East, but also from the psychological problem posed by the irreconcilable claims of Arabs and Jews for hegemony over the region. So that's a primer.
Paper trail.
Long paper trail. That itself is from the CIA. These narratives have been so entrenched, not just in the ideology of a certain group of people, which we call the Zionists, it's also been deeply entrenched in U.S. foreign policy. And when we look at what's happening right now with the Biden administration refusing to see sense, they're really just perpetuating the foreign policy that they enacted in the 70s when they were still career politicians. So I think people are aghast at, why is all this happening? Why are they supporting it? It's like they're not. It's just there's a genocide happening right now, but the policies haven't changed. They're literally just doing the only thing that's, the only thing that's really changed is the visibility of the ethnic cleansing happening in Palestine right now. And people are starting to realize these imperialist systems, the fact that their own democracies are completely compromised. And you could argue corporatocracies, really, when you get above the political level into the corporate sector, who buy our politicians, who lobby them. There's this myopic fixation on AIPAC, but it's not just AIPAC. There's a whole lot of other interests going on. There's BlackRock, Vanguard, the global masters of financial capital that want, a lot of projects to happen. They want the normalization between the Gulf states and Israel and Egypt to happen so they can do the Mumbai to Europe pipeline. So there's just a lot of stuff going on. And what you mentioned in one of your videos was how Palestine is everyone's issue. So from your perspective, I'm hoping that you could expand on that idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's all connected. I think if you want to get into like true indigenous thought, you have to realize your connection to this world and everything that exists in it and on this planet, including the planet itself, right? Like Palestine, I say it's everyone's issue because if you're a climate activist, like what they're doing, the amount of bombs that they are dropping, the bio warfare that they have been enacting on Palestine in years, they're uprooting the indigenous biodiversity around Palestine and replacing it with European plants, and they're poisoning the water. Like that's a climate issue. And the bombs that are being dropped on Gaza right now mess with the ozone layer and they make, climate change even worse. If you are, it's obviously a human rights issue. If you advocate for anything in this world, it is connected to Palestine. And I actually I hate that I have to get people to care about things by connecting it to them personally, but I recognize that we live in a selfish and individualistic world. And so that's the only way to do it. I just got back from a rally in New Orleans, and when you walk down the streets of the French Quarter and, the surrounding area, you'll notice on all of the street lamps, there's cameras, and they flash red and blue. And at first glance, you think that they're speed cameras, but then you realize that they're actually in pedestrian areas. So I had asked a friend of mine what those were, and they said that they were it was Israeli technology. They're facial recognition cameras, and they are just continuously scanning the street looking for criminal record matches, basically. And they have already falsely identified people for crimes that they did not commit. Of course, those people were Black. So we know that AI is racist. This is technology that's coming out of Israel. Now, this is something that was present throughout Palestine. They have been surveilling Palestinians for decades. Those surveillance cameras turned into robotic cameras that shoot you from afar. So, like, we've already seen something like, the skunk water that happened on Columbia's campus. Like, that was chemical warfare. It was imported from Israel. That's an Israeli chemical weapon that was used on Americans and American soil. We're seeing this AI, facial recognition technology in these cities that are predominantly Black and brown cities being surveilled. So this idea that like it's not connected to you, or that like the violence that is happening to Palestinians is never going to be here, it's not your problem, when one, you're paying for it, and two, it's already on your soil. It's already, like, Israeli violence and weaponry has already made it to America, and it's being used against Americans. Like, that is something that I'm continuously trying to get people to understand, that like, okay, skunk water might not seem too scary, and okay, technology advances, so we're all stuck with living under AI, but like, it doesn't stop there. Eventually the guns and the bombs and the other shit that they're using on Palestinians is going to end up on your doorstep, and then it's going to be too late, because what are you going to do?
The question is, where are all the libertarians out there who talk about, government control, Big Brother watching us, Big Brother controlling us, in the whole Israeli conversation? Because one thing that people fail to realize about Israel is that they have an entire industry. They thrive on the industry of providing governments with surveillance technologies they're used to control their population. Mm-hmm. That goes in complete, the opposite direction of like the libertarian groups that talk about, fuck the government's too big and the government's trying to control us. Well, all right, if you want to talk about that, you have to talk about Israel then, because they're the ones that are the forerunners of this technology. And China, the CCP, depends on Israeli technology oftentimes, and that cross-pollination of technology. So the fact that it's left out it boggles my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it has Israeli technology and violence has a hand in a lot of atrocities happening across the globe right now. Yeah. They are arming Azerbaijan against the Armenians. They're carrying out a genocide against the Armenians. That's Israeli weaponry. So, like, you can't fight for or claim to fight for human rights and dignity and justice and leave out Israel. That's if it's an intentional blind spot, or if it's, again, under the guise of, people are afraid of being called anti-Semitic for calling out a Zionist project, which is an extension of American imperialism and the American empire around the world. But like, I've definitely encountered people who are like intentionally Zionist, or, falling for believing in the propaganda because there's some like underlying racism and bigotry against Arabs and Muslims. But then there are people who really they cannot make the connection. And other than telling you that like the street camera that is looking at you in your house is connected to the same street camera that's looking at a Palestinian in their house, I'm at a loss for figuring out how to get people to make that connection to themselves at this point.
Well, it's almost as if the Palestinians are the beta.
Yeah, we are. We're the tester. We're the lab rat.
They're the beta test. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, so all the quadcopters, that we're seeing in Gaza and the West Bank, we're going to see them here. The AI controlled smart riot control guns, we're going to see here. We're going to see them mounted on police armored vehicles in the next few years.
Coming to a town near you.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, coming to a town. Yeah, well, it's going to start in the city.
Yeah, and people think that you're a conspiracy theorist when you connect these dots or say things like this, but
that's the gaslighting that happens.
Yeah,
you're a conspiracy theorist.
A conspiracy theory is something that you have to really stretch the truth to make sense.
You have to make a lot of assumptions to get to the conclusion.
There are no assumptions here. You have physical evidence of this stuff happening.
Yeah, it's part of the gaslighting. They'll also conflate it with the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which are terrible. Yes. And it's a problem. But you're making the problem, these anti-Semitic conspiracies, even worse by conflating the two. It's like, no, you have the bullshit anti-Semitic conspiracy theories out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's done on purpose. And I hate it.
And again, I was saying, like, we live in the entertainment capital of the world. It's no mistake that, the Super Bowl is the biggest, sporting event in this country. It's no mistake that Hollywood, is what it is today. The longer you can keep people distracted and the more you can suck them in through celebrities and sports and entertainment, and like, the less they care about what's actually happening in this world, right? Like
Greg said, bread and circus.
Yeah.
In one of his videos.
Yeah. And Americans hold a lot of power in terms of being able to make a change on what's happening across the globe. And so, like, it's no mistake that we're the population that is getting the shit end of the stick when it comes to making sure that people are uneducated and distracted. And, their budget cuts education is the first thing to receive budget cuts every year. So it's no mistake. No. Nothing is a coincidence. Yeah.
One thing that I noticed, one of the things that really changed my mind about Palestinians back when I used to be a Zionist and I lived over there, when you touched on this, and I want to go back to it, was when I was going to the West Bank and visiting all these villages, the care for the land, the respect of the actual land, meaning the nature around it. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about how this fight involves all of us. Well, let's talk about environmentalism for a second. Mm-hmm. How much do the Palestinians respect the natural environment? Like, you have the interesting what's the word, analogy of the Israeli industrial society, concrete, bulldozing things over and just establishing just a modern city. And then you have the Palestinian way of life, which is living with nature. The respect, like, for example, a good example is the olive trees, the olive groves. I saw you see it so viscerally when I saw that video of when they came over and took a man's land, his olive groves, and they literally chainsawed the trees down in front of him. That to me just devastated me when I watched that video. He got on his knees and cried and hugged the ground and apologized to his ancestors. He says, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, Dad." I could not imagine the guilt that he was feeling because he felt like he let his parents down by letting this happen. And to me, that just, it was so visceral in a model for who the Palestinians are. They're caretakers of the land. They respect it. We as Christians would not have the holy sites that we have today if it wasn't for the Palestinians protecting it. And it's quite a miracle that they managed to do that despite all the conquests that have happening in and out. Yeah. Palestinians have been able to maintain control of those holy sites and protect it like guardians with their own bodies.
Yeah, and one of the another point about that olive grove video, it's that when the Israelis steal olive trees and like uproot them and then go and plant them in their own kibbutzim, that's a whole thing. But destroying them outright was just a complete power move. Not just a power move, but an entirely self-destructive one too.
Crazy.
Like, yeah, it was an expression like they're kind of like just.
No, it destroys Palestinian livelihood. Like indigenous people live off of the land, and we survive off of the land. And Palestinian olive trees are a huge source of economy for Palestinians. And I'm glad that you brought up the indigeneity issue, because that was something that Noah had mentioned in that video. And there's a really great. There's an author that I follow on Instagram. They're a Jewish author. Their first name is Sim, and their Instagram handle is like escaping my mind. But they did a really great video on how even if you are indigenous, like if you're going to claim indigeneity to something, if you act like a colonizer, you essentially give up that right to indigenous claim. And I don't know if you noticed, like while you were talking about I get like very emotional and watching like the destruction of our land. Like I feel it on like a cellular level,
I feel you.
Those olive trees are planted by ancestors. Like he was apologizing to the ancestors because our ancestors plant these trees with the intention of affording their Palestinian descendants that they may never meet a way of life.
It's a selfless thing to do.
Yeah. Like a lot of, you plant an olive tree, you can't harvest it for 15 to 20 years. It's not for you when you do something like that.
And that's a practice of the Native Americans as
Yes.
well. Like
Yeah.
the parallels between the Native Americans and the Palestinians
Yeah.
is astounding to me.
Yeah, because indigenous culture is indigenous culture across the board. We all like the main idea of it is that you are living in harmony with nature and you understand that the planet has a soul and you are put on this earth to care for it and tend to it and to help it flourish, not destroy it and fucking bulldoze, ancient historical sites and the beautiful, flowers and trees that surround it so that you can put up a skyscraper and a hotel and a bar. Like that's what they're doing, right? They're demolishing Palestinian land to put up things that aren't indigenous to that part of the world to begin with, right? Like the destruction that you've seen in Gaza and the plans that people keep like leaking for like real estate that's coming up, like if you're indigenous to that land, you want to see it as it's supposed to be, not looking at like Miami on the shores of Gaza.
Not looking at concrete.
No.
Concrete and a nicely paved road.
No indigenous person wants that. If you truly identify with indigeneity, you don't want that for your land. It's just like a simple fact.
Well, they always give themselves away because they're coming from Europe, and a lot of settlers are coming from America, and they're trying to recreate that in a different part of the world.
Yes, yeah. Like I said, they're uprooting the olive trees and replacing them with these European. I forget what the tree is called, but with like just
avocados. That's I think no. Here's what here. No. The symbolism. No. Yeah, we're gonna get into this because I think it's a great analogy and symbolism of what's going on. You have the replacement of the olive, which has been used as a symbol for the Palestinians oftentimes, and it's being replaced by the avocados. We see that on social media. Like you guys just outed yourselves with your white liberalism because avocado is synonymous with the white liberal going to the cafe and putting it on their toast, and you've literally
fucking. Oh my god, this is like $12.
Avocado. Oh my god. Yeah.
Oh god.
So
class later.
But this is a great segue into white liberalism, and I wanted to go into this because you touched on something really powerful. I watched one of your videos, and you said a phrase that is a big no in the sense that nobody says it, but we all think about it. You said things like white supremacy in feminist spaces, and I want to talk about that. Let's talk. That's a juicy one because it's very provocative phrase, not because it isn't real, but because it's very real, and yet those words are not often heard in the same sentence. So how has feminism been weaponized by making itself a vehicle for white supremacy that has infiltrated most progressive, the most progressive of circles? If you can go into that a little bit, if you want.
Yeah. I think I'm so hardcore about this because I kind of was like, I feel like I've been duped by white feminism before. Like I definitely fell for some of the shit and like, I definitely was acting like a white lady for a long time. And that was me. Like,
we all have.
That was me unlearning the fact that like I wasn't actually white, right? Like I grew up actually thinking and being told that like we were a white family. And that was also like intentional. That's a supremacist action to erase the Arab identity. So I'm trying to figure out where I start with this one. Like what women elected Trump? We know that, right? Like we acknowledge that. Like all these women who are like, fighting for equal rights, like they voted for Trump. Like white women have power. They are a huge reason of why he was elected. And now you see them fighting for Biden, right? Like they're pretending like they didn't elect Trump, and now they're fighting for Biden by trying to scare you into another Trump presidency. But like, and they want to talk about like these feminist issues, but they don't want to talk about how it's affecting non-white women, right? Like Biden and Kamala's presidency have been deathly for every American president, has been deathly for brown and black people.
Yep.
But like, we're at a point now where we recognize that like, there's such a like if you're a true feminist, your feminism is intersectional, and white feminism is not intersectional. It focuses on white women and white rights. And we could see it, back when Roe was overturned. Everybody was freaking out, but there was no conversations around how like white women weren't affected by this, right? Like there was inaction on the overturning of Roe, and it was because that there was a realization that it actually doesn't affect white women. Like wealthy white women will always be able to find a place for a safe abortion. Always. It's always been that way. And so like there were a lot of conversations about how like even with, the existence of Roe, like brown and black women were still suffering the most and receiving dangerous care or no care at all. So like the fact that all these white women like got up in arms finally without the realization or acknowledgement that like black and brown women have still been fighting for their right to health care, and that they were never protected by this anyway. And now all of a sudden everybody's mad because same thing with the Israelis, dude. Like, oh, all of a sudden this right-wing government is coming in and affecting your rights and threatening your rights. And now you want to care. But there was no acknowledgement of the suffering of other people while you were, living comfortably with these rights. So white feminism is really dangerous.
Yeah, and not only that, it kind of got more egregious, especially when the Oscars were happening and the assault on Khan Yunis really went into fifth gear. And they're like, Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie, why didn't they get Oscars?
They were robbed. Yeah,
they were robbed. Not of their land or their dignity.
Oh, the horror! Horror!
The same thing with the deep fake. Look how quickly. Did you guys hear about the deep fake of Taylor Swift?
No, I don't.
No.
Really,
okay,
no,
there was like a deepfake porno made of Taylor Swift that was shared like 17 million times on X, and the American government got involved and decided that it was time to make some laws about AI, and like,
oh my god,
it taken down.
You are kidding me! From the I did not.
Yeah, within like 24 hours, they acted for this. So like that is the very epitome of what white feminism looks like.
That is the epitome because like just ignoring the fact that AI is used to, do surveillance on us and invade our lives or used in very nefarious means. No. It's the fact that Taylor Swift got her image ripped off and she had, that is insane. I didn't know that. That's terrifying.
Yep. Yeah.
That is hilarious.
But like every senator and every congressman's like, my daughter loves Taylor Swift. And we can't have her exposed to these horrible things. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, it's a joke. I mean, if anything, it's all connected. Everything is intersectional. Feminism, human rights, climate change, LGBTQ rights, all of it. Like, there is no denying this anymore. Anybody who's trying to separate liberation movements from one another is actively or unknowingly a fascist.
Well, I want to go into the gaslighting a little bit, if we can. So here's when I saw your video, I immediately related to it. And I would like to offer an even, deeper perspective. So you as a Palestinian you've experienced gaslighting from white people. Now, here's the interesting thing is, this is, and that's you from the outside looking in. As a white person, it's even more intense, the gaslighting that happens from white person to white person when you care about a minority group. And I've experienced this when I've taken, concern about something that's happening in the world. It's usually like, and you've touched on this, like, oh, you know what? You can't solve all the problems in the world. Like there's not much you can do about it. Like, it's just, it's sad, but it's like, we got to move on. It's almost as if it feels like everybody around you is in a yoga meditation session. And if you see somebody outside the yoga studio getting assaulted and you get up to do something about it, well, you're an asshole for interrupting the peaceful vibes. That's how it feels like. It feels like we're all in this yoga stance. It's like, just look, just keep the world out. Just keep the world out. It's just right here, baby, right here.
Yeah. And that's kind of why we named this podcast colonial outcasts because we're like two white guys going against the anti-imperialist system, or like having an anti-imperialist stance. And when you do that, you get called a whole bunch of crazy stuff. I live in Texas,
Traitors.
so race traitor. That's a fun one. It's like, oh wait, you're totally not a Nazi fascist, slinging that term around. Also, they also think there's something like mentally deficient with you, like, don't you understand the way the world works? So yeah, I'm not. So there is a lot of gaslighting, and there is a barrier to entry and a price to be paid for advocating for someone else's rights. But yeah, I mean, the gaslighting is universal, just works differently depending on your socio-cultural demographic. But I'm so done with white liberalism. For so many years, I thought I was a liberal, and then over the past 2 years, I was like, wow, I'm not.
Definitely not.
I'm so not.
Well, you were talking about how they made you had a powerful video where you felt like it was sowing doubt in your mind. Like, am I? And that was I loved how you worded it, because that's exactly how I felt at one point, where you start to doubt yourself. Like, is this just a phase? Am I being abnormal?
Mm-hmm.
But then when you kind of break it down, and that's why I'm glad you said that, because it encourages people who are looking at this atrocity and they care about it. What you did by putting out that video is you validated their feelings. You validated the very normalcy of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's very abnormal to look at an atrocity and then able to detach your feelings from it. Like, to me, that is the definition of a sociopath.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And our society is being encouraged down that sociopathic road. It's like, it's all entertainment. It's just news. It's just swipe up. Swipe up.
They inundate you with all these atrocities because they want you to think like you can't affect anything. Like you can't.
It's desensitization. You're desensitizing us,
Yep.
and it's not going to work this time. I don't believe it's going to work.
No, I don't think
because there's too many people like you out there who are saying, fuck that.
Yeah.
This is not normal.
Yeah.
Us watching a genocide happen and then just going to the next news cycle, that is not normal. And it is mentally unhealthy for all of us to do that. That's the mentally unhealthy part, is the fact that we can move on.
Yep.
Yeah. I just would like to be the buzzkill here for a second. It's like most people aren't even paying attention to this, to be honest, especially in America.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
we all have skin in the game for our own various reasons. You more so than either of us, being Palestinian. Yeah. But I mean, as you said, it affects all of us. And for most people, it's just easier to keep going to Starbucks and listening to Taylor Swift and watching the Oscars and not ever having to feel uncomfortable. Because let me tell you, as someone who grew up in a certain demographic of the white population world, going to like boarding schools and stuff, we don't like to feel uncomfortable. We're so not used to it. And, when that happens, shit gets violent because you feel like we're under attack and stuff like that.
Don't disturb the vibes, bro. Don't ruin the vibes. Bro.
Yeah. Yeah. I did an interview the other day where somebody was like, like, are we... Why do you see all this like mass mobilization around the world for Palestine, but like there's no change? Like we haven't been able to like push for this ceasefire. And I was like, because Americans don't actually care. Like we had the largest anti-war protest in American history in January was for Palestine with 400,000 people. What's our population? 330 million. That's what is that percentage? 400,000 people in a population of 330 million. That's nothing. Like and here's me being the buzzkill. Yeah, we've gotten the most recognition for this movement in our history, but like it's still not enough to actually enact change. Yeah. So until everybody decides that they care about this and that they, want to stop it from ending up on their doorstep, we're going to be watching this cycle.
Well, here is a silver lining. I think the impunity that Israel's being granted is, the rope it's going to use at its own gallows, especially if I don't want to get into strategic stuff in this video because it's beyond the scope of our conversation, but if they keep going the way they're going, they can't sustain it. And perhaps it's all part of God's plan. I don't know. But that's all I'm going to say on that. It's just, there are other factors at play beyond, us not protesting and it not having a big effect. It's actually it's having a bigger effect than we imagine. The fact that people just continue to get pissed in San Francisco because they block traffic, like that actually makes a difference. Sure, it's going to like turn some conservative assholes even more conservative asshole, but you can't save them all, right? But at least it's going to bring awareness and let people know that we're not going away. It's not going to stop.
Yeah.
So there is that aspect, and I mean, a lot of people don't care, but
what about the younger generation, guys? Like, I see a glimmer of light. I see a spark in these young people, the Gen Z generation. I do. I cannot deny it, and it would be deceptive of me to say that that's not happening. And I want to outline that the Gen Z generation they're on fire.
Yep.
And I do see hope in them. The boomers, fuck them. I'm just gonna say that. Fuck them, dude. They had their shot.
I know a couple.
And they sat on the couch. They sat on there's some great ones out there, and those guys stand out. They do.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, and so God bless them. God bless those awesome grannies out there. But the Gen Z guys, they are tearing it up. Mm-hmm. And I want to give them props, especially young Palestinians. Young Palestinians, what's beautiful about young Palestinians is oftentimes the problem with let's take people who immigrate from, say, Palestinians who immigrate to the United States. Mm-hmm. Other cultures who immigrate to the United States, oftentimes they kind of lose their heritage. They don't really identify anymore. Mm-hmm. We see this with some Latino populations, some Europeans, what have you. They'll come to the United States. They don't really care about their ancestry. They just kind of want to assimilate and dive deep into American culture and break those ties. Palestinians, no. That's what I love about them, is that they come over here, they're proud of it, and they're American, and they're some of the most culture leading Americans out there. They're brave and they're very edgy, but they also are very, very proud, and they honor their heritage, and that's what I love about them. Those guys are lethal, and I see them coming, and I see them coming strong. So I just want to ask you if am I in La La Land right now by saying this, or?
Actually, yes, it's the complete opposite.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Swing and a miss. Swing and a miss. Hey, it happens. Can't win
not
them
to
all.
say that. No, not to say that Palestinians don't come here proud, but actually, we're a very specific group of people that had to come here and assimilate for safety purposes.
Right.
I was not raised radical. Like I said, I was raised to be white, to act white, to talk white, so that it could blend in. It wasn't that we were hiding our Palestinian identity, but it wasn't something, like my dad's family got here in the 60s. My mom's family got here in the 70s, both really bad time for Palestinians in the US. My mom actively hid her identity while she was growing up. My dad looks Latino and is part Latino, but like totally leaned into that identity for safety purposes. So I think the reason why you're so impressed with our voice right now is because we were raised essentially to suppress it for safety purposes, because our families were focused on leaving oppression to come here and build a life to be able to sustain their families here and also back home, right? Like everybody sends money back home. And in order to do that, you had to keep your mouth shut and just put your head down and work. And so now that there's this generation of Palestinians whose families have provided them with, be it generational wealth or some sort of security in being able to claim an American identity and actually act like Americans, right? Like there's a power that is connected to having that safety. Like my parents put us in a position where I can get on a podcast and talk about the things that I talk about without being afraid of, being fired at a job or, you know what I mean? Like, so I think that that's what's like pumped us up so much is that, and then that generation, like now we're having kids and we're raising our kids with that pride and that understanding of who we are, where we come from. You channel your ancestors and you fight for your homeland. Like that's why you're here, right? Like we've realized that our purpose here is to fight for back home. So, but it took a whole generation of people kind of wiping out that Arab Palestinian identity in order to get there.
I mean, I have noticed that with the older generations of Palestinian immigrants who are here, there's that it's very similar to what Jews had to do when they came from Germany in New York City. The anti-Semitism that was brought on them, and like for example, my wife's grandfather, he completely squashed his Jewish identity because of the anti-Semitism that his father experienced in New York City before he came to California. That is it's very similar story for Palestinians, like you said, in the 1960s. But like I said, I do see this younger Gen Z folks. They're a whole new beast, and I do see hope in that. So I mean, do you see, what type of hope do you see in that generation, the Gen Z?
Absolutely. I mean, I think they have all the power, and when they finally gain that power politically, I think we got a new world coming.
I mean, I think the main thing is it's politically. I touched on this earlier. We live in the age of career politicians. In the 30s, the 40s, that didn't really exist. You do a couple terms in office, then you go back to being the dean of a university somewhere in the Midwest. But now Biden was there in the 70s, Cold War warrior, bragging about how the domestic legal legislation that he's passing basically does everything but hang someone for jaywalking. He's still in power. He's now he's an octogenarian guy who can barely talk. Then you got Lindsey Graham, who have been in office forever. You've got all of these legacy politicians from generations, and they're still locked into these old ways of thinking, as if we're still fighting the Cold War. As if the world hasn't changed at all. So I think like as millennials kind of positioned in the worst spot to make change. It's like the boomers aren't going to die before we're like in our 40s. And, so that's our prime in that way. But it's one thing, people are just in general waking up more to the fact that, as you said, everything's interconnected. And when you grow up realizing all the cracks in the system and that you're pretty much screwed, it's a lot easier to mobilize, and not get distracted by the Super Bowl or, the hot Taylor Swift or Beyonce single that's dropping. You're actually more concerned about their CO2 emissions from their private jets.
Yes. I love all the videos on TikTok about how Taylor taking a 13-minute flight, or like her trying to get to the opposite end of her plane, like she's taking another plane inside her plane. So, yeah.
I wanted to ask you more about like the one of the videos I watched where you were talking about the gaslighting that's you've experienced from white liberals to make you second guess yourself and doubt yourself. Can you go more into the tropes that you have to encounter with this type of thing? I think it's good for other people to hear that from you, so that who may be going through the same thing, so you can help validate what their thoughts, so they don't second guess themselves.
Yeah. I think a big one for me was refusing to condemn Palestinian resistance. That was something that a lot of white liberals were like waiting for Palestinians to do. And a lot of Palestinians who lost like white liberal friends, it was because we tried to get people to validate our resistance. And there is like, white liberalism is racist. And so a lot of the like immediate support for Israel after October 7th stemmed from that racism. Like, okay, you have a Palestinian Muslim friend. That doesn't mean you're not, Islamophobic or racist towards Palestinians, or have some, stereotypes about Palestinians being savages and barbarians that they've instilled into the American population for the last 70 years, still in there. And so October 7th really brought out a lot of that in people. And so a lot of the gaslighting that I experienced were people telling us that our resistance was illegitimate, but like acknowledging like the uprising, like the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, acknowledging, that so the civil rights movement wasn't this whole like, people just like peacefully protesting and waiting to get their rights. And like I said before, like the story about Nat Turner and the enslaved people who killed their masters, like when I was comparing these things to try to get people to understand that our resistance is just as legitimate, and every other resistance in history has also at that time been condemned. And now we've come, right? Like it took generations for us to kind of accept that that was an acceptable form of resistance.
The American Revolution.
Yeah.
It was about, we killed British for taxes, over taxes, not even genocide, just taxes.
Yeah. And so like, I mean, some of the things that people were saying to me who I considered family, you know, they were best friends of decades. They told me that my comparisons were asinine, that I, you know, that I was unhinged and deranged, and that I, like all of those tropes about the violent Muslim or like Muslims being terrorists or terrorist supporters really were like rampant during, you know, early to late October.
It worked on me when I was young.
Well, I think, anyway, I mean, it worked on me too. I mean, I joined the army not because I was like a Captain America. I just was kind of a little psycho. So, and I didn't want to go to college. But
you still are a little psycho, and I like it.
Yeah. No, that post 9/11 stuff, it hasn't gone anywhere, even with the liberals. If you remember at the opening of the Iraq War, how unilateral those votes were in Congress to invade Afghanistan, to invade Iraq, and that really hasn't changed. If you look at U.S., if you look at U.S. foreign policy, there's a myth that there's Republicans and there's Democrats, and yes, they fight over drag queens reading to kids and gender neutral bathrooms and Roe v. Wade. But if you look at foreign policy, they're the same party. They're a uniparty. Especially when it comes to the Middle East. I
think also specifically when it comes to Palestinians, like the reason why people were so quick to believe whatever the Israeli government was feeding them about October 7th on a timeline that didn't even make sense, right? Like they claimed to have all of these details less than 24 hours after this had happened.
Right.
Also comes from the belief that Palestinians inherently hate Jews and that's what this is all about. So like there are so many levels of tropes about Palestinians that like need to be dispelled that all stem from, you know, fascism. But I think the most prominent ones that I've experienced is that like people can't get on board with Palestinian resistance because they're convinced that it's because Palestinians hate Jews and not that Palestinians don't enjoy being oppressed.
Yeah. I think the most extreme example I saw of this ideology was, especially the post 9/11 propaganda stuff, was manifested like overseas, where when I was working with another special operations unit, and maybe not saying anything definitively, some people were killed that weren't supposed to be. And then when I went over to the site, I was like, "What the fuck happened here?" And they're like, "It takes a village, dude. You know how it is." And it's freaking insane bullshit. But that mentality still exists within white liberalism, just, to a less extreme degree than it did with a bunch of completely evangelical soldiers, group of soldiers, another special operations that I won't name, but if you're in the community, you know exactly who I'm talking about. So, that still exists. That whole takes a village mentality. And you can see it within our congressmen, our supremacist congressmen. It's like, kill them all. Like there are no innocents in Gaza. And those narratives that, sure, they've been building since the Middle Ages. If you read Dante's Inferno, there's a passage that describes Muhammad's torture and eternal torture and pornographic detail. It's just been mobilized by the Zionist lobby and by warmongering politicians after 9/11 to effectuate a political agenda. And to think that white liberals haven't been affected or been victim to that is kind of absurd, because, a lot of Zionists also, who are very influential within white liberal thought and spheres of influence, they also are New York City, Upper East Side, Upper West Side liberals. Yeah.
Did you see that video of that girl at a like protest in favor of Israel, and they were talking about the term "from the river to the sea."
Oh yeah.
She was like, "Where am I gonna go?" And everybody was like, "Bitch, your apartment in Manhattan, which is where you live." This idea that you're entitled to 2 homes and we can't even get one, like what? That's like super.
That is privilege at its finest. It is so.
Like, I just, I don't know.
No, but it was even worse because it wasn't her. She wasn't Jewish. She said her girlfriend was Jewish. So she was like, "Where am I gonna go?" It was even more egregious than that.
It's a self-centeredness. It's how they just want the spotlight on them, and whatever it is. It's like, how do I feel about this? How am I taking this? It's like, give a fuck about you. There's a genocide going on. What the fuck? Like,
anybody who attacked a Palestinian through any of this. I also had someone who claimed to be an anti-Zionist Jewish girl, but she was white, so that obviously took over her identity after October 7th. And the way that she was like condemning the resistance and telling me that she didn't think that our resistance looked legitimate. Like she was like, "Oh, I don't know, these don't look like resistance fighters to me." Like, what the fuck do you know about resistance fighters as a white woman?
What does a resistance fighter look like? What are they supposed to look like? Have a little badge that says resistance fighter that's shaped like a sheriff?
Yeah, like this idea that people felt like they could direct Palestinian pain and our emotions and our response to what was happening after 7 decades of watching and feeling our family living through oppression. Like that, like white liberalism has convinced itself that they are the superior voice or like moral compass for how
top of the pyramid.
Yeah. And so it was just really bizarre to see certain people not be able to grasp that they were,
It reminds me of during the Black Lives Matter movement, when Black people were calling for the end of this systematic racism that's deeply rooted in our judicial system, and then the gift that the white gods have laid down was they got rid of Aunt Jemima off the Aunt Jemima pancakes. Like that to me was so symbolic of your typical white liberalism. It's like, you know what, we hear you. We take your voice into consideration. Get rid of Aunt Jemima on the box. Oh, thank you.
Did you hear that they're now all those DEI initiatives that were born in 2020 after BLM? Zionists are now going after that and trying to dismantle DEI, saying that they're not inclusive enough of Jewish voices, and not that they are trying to, like, these companies have offered to expand these DEI initiatives to include those. They want to dismantle it like altogether. Like they're saying that these DEI initiatives are harmful to the actual idea of inclusivity. And it's if you look at what's happening right now in the dermatology space, they're attacking Black dermatologists. So yeah, there's just like an example of white supremacy and fascism across the board when it comes to anything that Zionists and white liberals touch. So yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how the fervor during the initial stages of the war in Ukraine, how we were, it became the new religion where support Ukraine. Now, I don't want to get into the Ukraine thing, but my point is that is a can of worms. I'm not going to get into it, but the point I'm making is that it goes back to where we are supposed to be emotionally invested in that situation because of what's happening to Ukrainians, which you can make an argument to or against that. I don't care. But then when you bring up the Palestinian plight, it's like, ooh, you know what, guys, it's too complicated. And this is what pisses me off. And this has been directed at me too. When I've debated the people on the pro-Israeli side, I was gaslit as well, saying, you know what, it's very complicated. And that's the cop-out. It's the common cop-out. It's too complicated. Like when you say, hey, look, Israel is dropping bombs on kids right now. Yeah, but it's kind of complicated, you see, because, Hamas is using them as human shield. And then that's their way of just kind of trying to push me out of the conversation and making me feel like I'm like, okay, yeah, it is complicated, but it's also simple. Here's the simplicity of it. When you kill innocent civilians, regardless of strategy, tactics, you have to get involved in the conversation and start asking questions. Mm-hmm. Even if you kind of make an argument that you need to do that, I don't care. That's a whole nother can of worms too, but it's like, no, it's not complicated. Yes, it's a complicated topic overall in the history, but there is simplicities involved, and I have a right to talk about that. I have a right to go into that. Everybody has a right to talk about that. It's this way of pushing people out of the conversation just to keep them, from honing in on what really needs to be talked about. So
yeah, and one thing about Ukraine, I'm only mentioning it within the scope of white liberalism. I don't care if you think it's a complete CIA neocon proxy war, or that Ukraine's fighting for liberation against Russian imperialism. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, we're not.
When there was this big moral outrage against what the Russians were doing in the first 3 months of the war, remember all these liberals coming out being like, they need their freedom. Yeah, those voices went silent after 3 months. And now this war of attrition has been dragging on for years. And Ukraine it looks like they are losing. They've just replaced their chief of staff for their military. They're during the middle of a war, which always speaks to political fracturing. They just pulled out of Avdiivka in the Donbass region. Major defeat for Ukrainian forces. They're running out of money, which is why we're trying to give them $60 billion. So things aren't looking good. But all those, fervent voices at the beginning of the war, they've been silent for 2 years. So don't really need their support, because it goes away rapidly anyways.
Yeah. I mean, even just from a media perspective, right? Like, I'm a media expert. The way that the coverage was so different for Ukraine than it is for Palestine. You had reporters completely unprompted. Nobody was fucking asking them questions about ethnicity, saying, we have to care about these people because they watch Netflix and they have blonde hair and blue eyes. And they were using pictures of Palestinian children. Like, do you know who Ahad Tamimi is?
No.
So she has a really great book. It's called They Called Me a Lioness. And she's from a town in Palestine that is regularly raided by the Israeli military. She's been imprisoned multiple times. Her family's been imprisoned. And there was a really incredible video of her when she was younger. Like, this is years old. I think she's probably late teens, early 20s now. This video is from when she was like literally 12 years old. And she's got a tank top on. Mind you, everything with Ukraine started like winterish time. So there's this video of her wearing a pink tank top, her hair in a bun, and she's like going to punch an Israeli soldier who was like trying to arrest her brother.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember this one.
And it circulated like wildfire. People were like, look at these brave Ukrainian girls. Like, look at them standing up. They're just normal civilian people standing up to this violent military. And everybody was like, hello, first of all, that's one of ours.
Wow.
She's got blonde hair and blue eyes. Doesn't mean she's fucking Ukrainian. And then it was like, okay, so you do get it. You can see these images and you can understand if you wanted to. But when it comes to Palestine, all critical thought is lost. And the racism, component is triggered in everybody's brain, and they can't seem to function or understand shit anymore. But yeah, so I will always talk about Ukraine from the media perspective, because I think that that's a really important issue. And it's also a really great comparison to get people to understand how racist legacy media actually is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jon Stewart talked about that once.
Oh, yeah. He's a G.
He is. He is.
All right, y'all. So covered a lot of ground, I think. I definitely do like. I definitely do like how we honed in on this idea of liberalism. That's like a main theme for our channel at the moment. We're always trying to expand that.
We're a little obsessed with it.
It's because we're a little obsessed with it because finally someone's talking about it. I got out of the military and I started going to college in Manhattan in New York City in 2014, like late 2014. And I got out of the military because I had a huge problem with the chief of staff, the head of state, and his drone strike policies. But I could not say at that time that Obama was a fucking war criminal without being racist. So that's just... And that was 2014, but almost 10 years later, this happened, and now I can totally say it. And everyone's like, "Oh yeah,
all of them."
Yeah.
Yep.
So these these social changes do take time, but it's promising to see this actually be a conversation, a widespread conversation for the first time, because I think it's very important. I think white liberalism and white nationalism are two sides of the supremacist coin that are solely focused on maintaining privilege and perpetuating a mutually destructive status quo for everybody else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to make clear to everybody listening that this is not a white bashing thing. We're not making this about, let's just put white people as a piñata and we're hitting them with it. No. White liberalism and white supremacy are prisons that white people are currently herded into. Just like the Jewish communities they've been trying to shove them into the Zionist prison that they have broken out of. Thanks to the Palestinians, they've been able to break out of it, with courage. And I just want to say that to white people listening to this, because I know there's a lot of, like victim mentality with white people, where it's like, oh, you're just bashing white people, like, oh, it's all about white people, you're just hating white. No. White supremacy and white liberalism are prisons that we have been shoved into. Mm-hmm. So it's important for us to break free of that, just as much as it is important for the Jewish community to break free of any types of strangleholds that Zionism has, So I just want to make that very clear, And I just want to say, I really appreciate your videos and watching them. And because you probably don't realize it, to its full extent, but the effect that these videos have on people that have self-doubt, that are sowed seeds, what you're doing is you're giving them courage to finally validate themselves and be like, you know what I am very normal by being emotionally aggrieved by this. Mm-hmm. It is abnormal not to be aggrieved by this. Mm-hmm. So I just want to say you're doing powerful work, and I really appreciate your videos and what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for this great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Don't get me doxxed by Noah, your little cult.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No. We'll try the best not to get you doxxed.
It's gotta be a weird cult.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, solid session. We're gonna sign off, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. We'll link Jenan's information, Instagram in the description if you're cool with that.
Yeah, cool.
Okay,
yeah,
awesome.
And stay on after we end recording.
Yeah, because you got to upload it, right?
Yeah. All right. See y'all next time.
All right, peace out, folks.
Bye.